And everyone, welcome back to the 2021 annual Wrestling Mindset Leadership Clinic, perhaps the greatest wrestling clinic virtually that we've ever seen. And we want to make sure that we remember that this is being dedicated to our wrestling teammate at the University of Pennsylvania, Matt Eveleth, as well as Don Ernst, our longtime wrestling coach, both fighting for their life with cancer. We ask you for their prayers. And of course, pray for everyone in the wrestling community who's struggling, mind, body, or emotions. We're with them. We remind you that leaders are readers. Make sure you get that summer reading program that we're kicking out to all of the great presenters with their books. And make sure you donate to Beat the Streets. The wrestling community has to come together. We want to make sure we're all supporting one another and everyone who's doing great things. So make sure you click the link where we have there, supporting Beat the Streets. Friends, we have a great honor right now with a man who needs no introduction anywhere in the world, not just the wrestling world, anywhere in the world. The great Dan Gable, Olympic champion, multiple-time NCAA champion, coach, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, the great Coach Dan Gable. Coach, thank you for joining us.
Wow, I'm impressed. You're doing a lot for the sport, and that's exactly what I like. We've been taking a hit for a couple years. And I know people can say, well, I've been doing this and I've been doing that. But there's a lot of kids that probably would have been involved that aren't involved. And we have to figure a way out to get them back involved. And this is part of the process. So I thank you for that.
Absolutely, Coach. Like you said, just all of us coming together, just like we did with Stanford Wrestling. Joe Galli was speaking just before you, and he was talking about how great that is, because if we lose one team, we're going to lose more and more. So we have to fight nail and tooth for each and every wrestling program, men's and women's.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of interesting that, we got a new Stanford coach. You know what? When in times of turmoil, which Stanford's been going through it for over a year, people get, they come out of their shell. And they say some things and they do some things and it's really good. But sometimes what happens is that you actually create some situations that maybe aren't workable. And so, maybe Stanford's coach by going to American University is more workable, and getting somebody new is more workable, just because, when you're fighting for your life, it's pretty amazing what you'll do and say, and people remember, and you got to work together, like you're saying. And so, at first I was thinking, wow, I just can't believe they didn't keep the coach. But, he's been through hell for a year, and he probably has said some verbiage that somebody will never forget. And I think it's probably a good thing that, Rob Cole, I've had some good talks with Rob Cole in the last couple of years, and he's searching. I felt like he's searching because he wants to win that national championship so bad. And he was talking to me, he actually sought me out. And I really gained a lot of respect just because, people want to be successful. And it's that drive that makes the difference. And when you're internally just trying to figure it out and you're going for help and you're doing things, that's what it's all about. It just doesn't happen, is what I'm saying. It just doesn't happen. And I can appreciate what you're saying about Stanford, and about Fresno State. That's another huge one. But it's like, and I'm involved personally there just because of Troy Steiner, and Troy probably through all this turmoil, if they keep it, probably might be a tough position to keep. So I'm, you learn. I keep learning my whole life, because I wasn't so sure that was the case until I talked to Mike Moyer a little bit about it. And Mike explained to me a few things about what was going on, and it made sense. And so here I am, pushing to my age, and I'm still learning, and that's great.
Absolutely. And that was one of the real big things I wanted to pick your brain about. I know that you're always learning, you're always gathering more information. We know the work ethic at Iowa. Everyone knows the grind and the hard work, the toughness, but a lot of people don't see behind the scenes the passion and the humility of the coaches. And that's a standard you set over there, where you would really try to get the most out of each athlete by speaking to their coaches, their high school coaches, maybe their parents, their friends, their teammates, their girlfriends. Can you talk about that a little bit in an effort to get the most out of each individual, all the work you did behind the scenes to learn more about that kid?
I don't think I was born with that kind of information. It just so happens I had a pretty good route. And that route was, I had some good parents. I mean, my parents were crazy, and they liked to drink beer, smoke cigarettes, and it cost them probably their lives earlier than they should have been. And they grew up in Waterloo, Iowa. It was kind of a blue collar place. And it was one of these things that they went for help. They sent me to the YMCA. I got a lot of good help from people at the early age, besides learning how to swim, which is very key for everybody. And then all of a sudden, I had a good math teacher in 8th grade that kind of got me on academics, and he was a wrestling coach. And then I had a great high school coach, Bob Siddons, who's famous in the high school ranks. And then I went to Dr. Harold Nichols, who was totally opposite of my high school coach. My high school coach was running every second of practice, or almost every second. He did a lot of 6-minute goals, but he still was verbalizing and talking to different things all practice long. And then I went to Iowa State, and Dr. Harold Nichols, he pretty much rolled the basketball out, which wasn't a basketball, but he just said, start practice. And then he would say, practice is over. He had an assistant, Les Anderson, that actually was doing some of the detail work. But, he was just teaching independence, and he really had a lot of talent there that was sharing their talent. And so the more each guy got to go with the good guys, they were going to learn what the good guys were doing. So, that's pretty amazing. Then he started, Coach Nichols started a club, and he kept people around, and that helped the international scene, which is so important. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting ready for the Olympic Games, and this guy that's going to take over at the University of Iowa named Gary Kurtelmeyer put this plan together. And what's amazing is Gary Kurtelmeyer and Dr. Harold Nichols were from a town called Cresco, Iowa, a small little town of 2,000. And they both grew up there and went to high school there and won state championships there. And they were different ages. Dr. Nichols was older, but I mean, it's a small little town in Iowa, northeast Iowa, up by the Minnesota border. And then they had another famous guy from Cresco, Iowa, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Norman Borlaug was from there, and he was a wrestler. And he's got a statue in Washington, D.C. He created some unbelievable things. He went to the University of Minnesota, wrestled there, but he actually is famous because he invented a process to feed the world. And he was a wrestler. So, we got these little towns that have sent some of the most fantastic people out to the world to create good things. And so Dr. Nichols from Cresco, Iowa, went to Ames, Iowa. Gary Kurtelmeyer from Cresco, Iowa, went to the University of Iowa. He went to some other places before that, but all of a sudden, his first year as a head coach, he put together a plan. He just didn't think about this and have it just in his mind. He put it down on paper. I mean, you call it a plot or you call it different things, but he actually did some things that you don't think about. What did he do? Well, he wanted Dan Gable from Iowa State to be his assistant. This because I hadn't even won the Olympics yet, but I was going to the Olympics. And I was favored to win the Olympics, but I had this name, and he wanted to help draw, change the complexity of the program, and he got some other people involved, and he sent them out, I mean, Dr. Harold Nichols had a guy working for him that was actually an undercover guy from Kurtelmeyer. And so they were just kind of following me, and I never knew any of this stuff. So, it wasn't like a bad thing, but, it was one of these things that you do as to try to win a recruit, to try to get a good program going. So, he ended up, Kurtelmeyer ended up getting my friends. He talked to them on the phones. He talked to my mom and dad. He brought them in person. And then he had a plot. The plot was, he said I could wait till after the Olympics and make up my mind, which that's kind of what I wanted to focus on, the Olympic Games. And that's what I did focus on. I didn't focus on what I was going to go to the University of Iowa and be their head assistant coach. What I focused on was winning the Olympic Games. But all of a sudden he changed his mind before I even went to the Olympic Games. And he says, Gable, I think you're going to have to make up your mind right now. And he's caught me like a shock. And I had no idea. And I said, I don't know. Can I call you tomorrow? He goes, yeah, call me tomorrow. So, me being the guy that I am, I went to my parents and I asked them, and I thought for sure they would say, don't worry about it. Well, my dad said, take the job. And I said, let me talk to my mom. And my mom said, take the job. And I had no idea that this is all kind of a setup. So I said, I don't want to talk to you guys anymore. I'll call you tomorrow. So I called my friends, and my friends, they told me to take the job. And it's like, wow, what the heck's going on? So the bottom line, the next day I called him and I told him I'd take the job. But I didn't have to really worry about it. And I had people on my side that I felt comfortable with. So I was still not really that much change, but it did shock the heck out of me. And it's just kind of the way you build a program. When he got me there, one of the things that was amazing to me was I had always been around the best wrestlers in the state, the best at my high school. We won the states almost every year. I went to Iowa State, and they were winning the national titles every year. And then I went to the World Championships, and we're around the best wrestlers in the United States, and we're pushing Russia for the championship. So I'm around these kind of guys. So it was pretty amazing for me to all of a sudden go to a program, and I didn't understand how they thought. And that's real key, because I thought they were thinking on the same wavelength with me. Yeah, Kurtelmeyer was, another assistant coach was, and some friends that he had already built for like a wrestling club that were on the same wavelength, but the team wasn't. And I didn't understand that. And I always say this, he brought me in for recruiting to help recruit some of the athletes, but they were the athletes that came in under somewhat my mentality, a new mentality, which was kind of, they weren't going to come to Iowa unless there was something special for them. And it was Dan Gable, but it was more than that. They wanted to win national titles. They wanted to win national championships, and they wanted to be on board. But I didn't understand that the sophomores, juniors, seniors, and the people they had there wasn't on that same wavelength. And so that really shocked me. And it took success by those new recruits early on to start getting some of the old timers to come on our side. And so say you have a squad of 40, 10 new recruits, 30 old ones that were there. Well, if you would have to prove it with the 10 new recruits. And it took early season tournaments and the commitment that they were making as compared to what the commitment the other 30 were doing, because they weren't used to what we were doing, because I was kind of the leader. I just come off the Olympics, and I'm not going to slow down, not initially. I mean, I'm 23 years old, probably could have wrestled another 2 or 3 Olympics. And I'm still, training hard and all that kind of stuff. And they're not really on that same wavelength, except for the 10 guys. So it took a while for those 30 guys to join the 10 guys. but it took success by the 10 guys. And I really didn't have captains at that time, even though you did. They weren't really the type of captains and leaders you needed, because you need the kind of captains and leaders that actually have proven something. We had a few All-Americans, but those few All-Americans were All-Americans because, they were good, but not kind of good that it's going to take you to world or Olympic titles, or the kind of good that's going to take you to national titles. But they came around, but it took time. I bet by the end of that year, instead of having 10 and 30, we had 25 and 15, 25 that wanted to be really good, and 15 that's kind of stayed their own way. And probably most of the guys were seniors, fifth year seniors, fourth year seniors, third year juniors, fourth year juniors. And, it took a little time, but I'm the kind of guy that didn't understand that, but I learned it. And that really was good for me because it taught me a lot about coaching, But go ahead.
Right. And now there were some of the guys that maybe they weren't quite getting that message, or that you knew they had another level in them. How did you find that next gear? Did you speak to people in their lives? What did you do behind the scenes to get them more motivated and to get them to rise to the occasion?
I don't know if I had all this information immediately, but it developed over the first few years. And it might still develop once after 4 years I became the head coach. Because, once you become the head coach, that's a different role. But yeah, I would say that it goes back to my family life. It goes back to the YMCA. It goes back to my junior high coach. It goes back to my high school coach, where I'm learning, and I'm hoping to understand things better. I would say that one of the first things I did once I got going was make up a sheet that had questions where I, instead of like taking time to learn, and that takes years, takes months, I had the athletes fill out forms that were questions handcrafted by myself and the other coaches. And then they filled them out, and then we could, instead of, you can do the same thing in individual meetings, but if in an hour you could have 40 athletes fill out a form and find out a lot by them, and even by just how detailed they fill out the form, it's going to tell you something and what you got to work with. So yeah, so in reality, that helped a lot, but in reality, you had to actually bring the kid in and go over what he wrote. And I didn't do that. I took for granted he was telling me the truth. Don't take that for granted. They'll tell you what you want to hear a lot of times, depending on who they are. And so, yeah, it took me years to figure that one out, 2 or 3 or 4 years. Where in reality, again, I could have probably went over with each one of them, and I could have caught them in what they were telling the truth. They don't tell the truth. They tell you what you want to hear. So, that was very important. So, sometimes I messed up there, but once I learned that principle, then I started going more beyond just talking to them, going to their parents, going to their high school coach, going to their friends. And what's really a key element? Having somebody on the team that is a strong leader that everybody looks up to. That's hard to find. When I first got there, I just continued with my leadership role that I had all my career as an athlete. But I wasn't an athlete anymore. And so there were some things that I was doing that probably weren't as good as it should have been. So my work ethic, all that type of stuff. And I was an assistant coach, but I was probably running around too much, nightlife and things like that. whereas in reality, that wouldn't have happened if I had been training. So, I look at the teams that I've had at Iowa as a coach, and almost every year I could pinpoint one person that was on that team that drove that team. I can go back and I could look at guys' names like Chuck Yagla. I could look at a guy's name like Bruce Kinseth. I could look at once they got developed, I could look at guys like the Bannock boy, Barry Davis, the Bannock boys, especially Ed. And Lou had his own kind of way of doing things. And then I look at kind of the teams that we struggled a little bit, and I look at each guy, and I one of them or two of them might have became a leader down the road, but we were lacking somebody on that team that everybody looked up to. So that was really key on some of the actually teams that did the worst, and that means like taking second in the country pretty much. But it's one of these things that you as a coach take on that responsibility, but you can't do it forever. And it's better if you have an athlete that can take on that role of responsibility that everybody looks up to. And I think that's real key.
Coach, that's huge, because we know the athlete-coach dynamic can literally make or break a kid. So with our wrestling mindset program, we have one of the lessons that we have the athletes fill out a form with their coach. They fill this out together. Now, I know the questions we have on our form. What questions were on your form?
Well, one of the ones that was like that I flunked at was, how much coaches help do you need? Or are you an independent guy that can just get along really well without a lot of coaching? And, it's more like, I always liked coaching, but I was still the guy in the room that probably was getting less coaching than most people, just because I already had that work ethic and all that. Well, again, when I read this answer, it says, Coach, I always idolize you. I want to be like you. I know you're pretty independent, and yeah, you don't need the only thing. Just yell at me once in a while. Make sure I'm working hard, but I'm a really hardworking guy, and I don't need a whole lot of help. It's like I read that and I'm saying, wow, well, it wasn't working in this particular case. Finally, it took me about 2 or 3 years, and I brought him in and went over it again. Should have brought him in right away, but he admitted to me right there that he was intimidated by me and that he respected me, and he only would write what I wanted to hear. And that's, if I had a group of 30 guys on the team that were unbelievably like a captain, and they just were dedicated, and they had no problems with academics, they had no problems with nightlife, they were just gun ho, and they, that'd be great. But this, he told, I remember him telling me, he says, see what I wrote there? I wrote, I don't need a lot of help with the coaches. He says, I need all kinds of help. I just said that, and it like shocked me. And I should have, I threw that one out the door. But you know what? Once he said that, he started turning the corner, and he ended up being a national champion. He was always just a little short, and it was because the coaches were not helping him as much as we needed to. So it's pretty famous. Guy's name was Brad Smith, but Brad Smith won a national title, and he won it by major his senior year, but he came up short every other year. But you know what he didn't come up short in? Coaching. And so just the fact that he learned a lot in that coaching situation carried on to his coaching. And he's like the all-time winningest coach in the state of Iowa now. So it's pretty amazing that how things happen.
That's right. So it sounds like that form is really just a jump start, or really the beginning of an ongoing conversation. You have them fill out the form and then you call them in ideally immediately. And would you say not just the starters, but everyone on the team, you would recommend give out the form and then have individual meetings? Now, would you do this with the head coach and the athlete, or the head coach, the assistant coaches, and the athlete? What are the dynamics there?
Well, I think mostly it was like, how are things going? Yes, the one thing you don't want to do is cut corners. So if you fill out 30 forms and only talk to the guys that are good, you're creating a negative situation for the other 20, that they don't care for you. My number 30th guy knew that I cared for him as much as my number 1 guy. And we never really labeled them, but coaches kind of could label, and they kind of knew. And the goal was, if you're kind of the number 30th guy in the room, well, let's get to the 29th guy. Let's get up to the 28th. Let's push towards that top. And the top guys, if you're the top guy in the room, you're going to have to do things to stay on top too. So even though there's no place for you to go, there is places for you to go, because number 2 is pushing to be number 1. So that makes for a very competitive situation, but a healthy situation as well. You got to remember, wrestlers, athletes, people, we're touchy. And if you don't give everybody kind of similar type of help, they get upset. But what's really critical is that when you understand something as a coach and you want to get it passed, that you don't tell them that this is how it's going to happen. You want your team on your side. And I know this is a no-no too, and I've said this several times, like, man, wrestling's hard work. I mean, you got your own practice, you got second practices sometimes, you got independent practices, and those types of things. And you don't really cut a lot of corners. You don't say, well, this guy, you can do this, you can do that. And you do is you talk to the team, and you get the team to also be on board with what you want to get accomplished. If they're on board, then you can get it accomplished. If they're not on board, then you're going to have a lot of guys go different directions, and we'll have a little fights and little squabbles, and then all of a sudden you'll have parents calling you and so on and so forth. So it's like, it's like if somebody's not going to be able to, somebody's going to skip practice, which, that's a no-no. And you don't call it skipping practice. What you do is you call them, I don't know if this kid should come to practice. Maybe he should do something different today than you guys are doing. Or maybe he's proven that he's better if this is the case for him. And if you just throw something out like that, you're in trouble, because the other 29 guys that just ran 40 sprints and the other guy didn't, they're pretty upset. But if the 29 other guys say, hey, I don't think so-and-so should go to this practice, just because he's proven that he's better if he gets rest, or he's proven if his mind's not capable of going to a 3-hour practice, but he really comes and he can go for an hour and a half, and he's getting a lot out of it. In fact, that other hour and a half, he just doesn't get anything out of it. And if the team says that and wants that, that's the way to go. But of course, that's what you want, but you got to get the team to agree with you. And that takes a lot of work. And it's not that simple, because if you get one guy to object, it's negative. And you got to get a complete team to be on the same thinking that you want yourself. Or, if the kid that you're trying to help out doesn't like it either, then we're gonna have to figure something out different. But no, it's a team effort to help with the total scenario.
Excellent. And generally, the responses we get from the kids, both their verbal responses as well as their action responses, what they do on the mat, are a result of the questions we ask them. What are some examples of good questions for coaches to ask their kids? And what are some examples of maybe common bad questions that coaches ask their kids?
Well, I would say that you have a philosophy as a coach, and if they don't like that philosophy, then they can ask questions. So say, for an example, wrestling's at 3:00 in the afternoon, practice. But yet it's kind of a unwritten scenario that if you want to work out in the mornings, you're going to, get your own conditioning in, get your own weightlifting in. Sometimes you organize that too, but just sometimes you don't. And it's kind of an unwritten rule. And so, so you have these parameters. So it's like, okay, if you're really going to have a good practice at 3:00 every day, as a coach, I want my kids recovered and ready to go and motivated. So 3:00 back up. I don't want anybody working out probably after 9:30 in the morning. Be done pretty much by 9:30. So they're going to, go to class. They're going to recover, get possibly a nap, have some lunch. They're not going to be like still tired. So, it's one of these things that it's not exactly easy to fit in, because some kids might have classes all morning, and maybe they only have a break between 12 and 1 o'clock or 12 and 2. So, I had this one kid that I didn't realize he was working out every day at 12 o'clock. And I just happened to be walking through the field house, and he was running sprints or running the stairs. And I'm saying, hey, what are you doing working out right now? Because practice is in 3 hours. You're going to get done in about a half hour. You're going to be done at 1, and you're going to go to class till 2 or 2:30, and you're coming right back to practice. What are you working out for now? He said, well, this is the only time I can work out. I said, no, wait a minute. What time's class start? He said, well, class starts I go 8 till 11:30. I said, well, you know what? For you need to go to bed early at night and come, get over here about 6:45 in the morning, get about 45 minutes of good conditioning in the morning, and then go to your class. He said, I just can't sleep. I study. He says, I study late. I said, maybe you ought to change your study habits a little bit and, study between 8 to 10 or something at night. He said, I'm still recovering from practice. And, I had been noticing also that his practices were pretty good between 3 to 4, but between 4 and 5, wow, he was just exhausted. And now I knew why, that type of stuff. But, I told him, and I tried to plead with him, but, he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it, and I really think that when his whole career was done, he missed a lot of good wrestling victories. And I wasn't going to make him train earlier, or I wasn't going to make him. In fact, what I would have, if I had to do it over again, I would probably have suggested not even getting an extra workout in at noon. But maybe now that I think, I might even suggested that to him. And I think he told him, well, I keep my weight down or something like that, something stupid, and because that's not a part of the process. You got to be smart. You got to have that figured out, and especially now with the 1 hour weigh-ins, 2 hour weigh-ins, you got to be more on top of all that stuff. And it's just that I've had conversations with him after, and, he still does. He's doing a good job with his life, but I think he finally agreed with me, came around, but it took a long time. to where he just didn't have the energy to go a 2 or 3 hour practice when he was only recovering for like an hour or two. So, that's kind of one of the things that's really critical. And I didn't even know it. And I think that's a negative on my part. You got to know what your kids are doing. You got to know. You got to know that when they're training in the morning, when they're, if they train at night, you got to give them that education to where they understand why. A lot of times when I was a kid growing up, or even when I was first starting to coaching, there wasn't as many principles out there like there are now. There's so much information. It's just, there's so much to learn. I mean, and I can't believe, I've been going through 3 years of kind of hell, to be honest with you. And what do I mean by that? Not really. 3 years ago, I kind of got sick, and took 3 years to figure out what's wrong with me. And I went 10 times to the doctors, and we got great doctor schools at the University of Iowa. But, it's like I go in and I finally, they kind of tell me what the University of Iowa is. It's a teaching school. We're still learning, we're teaching. So a lot of the doctors that are really experts, they're kind of there and they're helping people become doctors and stuff like that. Well, it took me 3 years to find out that, what my problem was. And finally, I kind of collapsed. I didn't collapse, but all of a sudden, something really negative happened to me, and I had to go to the emergency room. And when I went to the emergency room, I failed every test they gave me, and they took me right in. But people don't know all the answers. There's a lot to learn yet. So in your coaching and in your wrestling, in your skills, there's still so much to learn. Because even at the highest level, your health, they don't know. They just don't know. And all of a sudden, when it comes down to reality and they are able to know, then they can help you. But it took 3 years to help me. And I'm just coming around now. It's because I had a couple surgeries about a month ago. But you know what? Why didn't they tell me that 3 years ago when I went through 8 different sessions, what was wrong with me? Well, they just don't know. Nobody is perfectly smart. We're still learning. Like right now, I got my first knee operation. They gave me a choice to remove my cartilage or to tie it back down. And I said, well, why are you asking me that? And they said, well, we haven't really figured out what cartilage is for. And so what we do is we usually just take it out, or we could repair it and we could tie it down. But as far as you getting back on the mat, it's going to take the difference between 4 weeks and probably 6 months. And I said, so you don't have a function? There's no function? They go, no. And so I said, well, just get me back in a month then. Well, that was wrong to do, because I could have, I wouldn't be walking in as much pain right now. Probably, I don't have a lot of pain, but it's like one of these things that a wrestling coach and a wrestler, when I was coaching back in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, there's things I'd do different today. And I would do them different probably just because I'm more educated. That's simple. And for coaches and athletes to get a mindset that doesn't adapt to the times or what's current, then you're making a mistake in a couple different ways. It's just, there's more science now that says that, what you should do as far as training. I mean, it's just simple. I mean, a simple thing. I'll give you an example. My junior high coach had me run on concrete in a tunnel below the school every day during practice, because we had a practice room was too small. So half the time we were out, and we were doing it in our wrestling shoes. A simple procedure today would be take off your wrestling shoes, put on your good running shoes, and you can run on the cement, or if there's a better surface, run on it. But, it's one of these things that back in those days, nobody thought about it. They might run barefoot, they run. Plus the fact with your wrestling shoes, you're going back in the wrestling room and you just ran outside on concrete. What are you bringing in with you? Well, nowadays you're a lot smarter. So that's why you continually learn. Go ahead.
Right. And learning would be that ongoing communication that it would seem like you had with your athletes. I know there's no exact answer to this, but if you had to put a number, how frequently should the coach be meeting with each athlete throughout the course of a season or throughout the course of a school year?
I would say that if you're a good coach, your athletes are coming to you just frequently and sitting down on the other side of your desk and having a chat. And if you don't have that, then the coach may have to get off his rear and have that chat. Now, I like it in person, but it's so easy to chat in person right now. I feel like I'm in person right now with you. So, it's one of these things that today's day and age, and you got to take time. You can't be so old fashioned that you don't know how to do anything electronically, because that's where kids are. And so you got to stay up to date there. And I'm probably the worst at it, but I still know enough to get by. And I'm learning there too. But you also don't want to get carried away there either, where it consumes you. Because in wrestling, we're not going to get a lot better perfectly by just watching good wrestling. We have to actually be on the mat, and we have to actually feel it. And so you can't get away from them number of repetitions that you do, even though you can push buttons and see the best wrestlers in the world and say, wow, look at this, look at this, look at this. I love it when you get good enough that you're so good that you can learn by only watching and not having to performing. You know what? I've actually done that before. Towards the end of my career, actually, when I was watching a great technical skill, I would go to practice and I instead of just, working on it, I would just hit it. But it was already because I already had all these base built that was so perfect almost that I could do it. But you're not going to do that with beginners. You're not going to do that with guys that are, unless they're the top cream of the crop. Speaking of the cream of the crop, I had a kid named Chris Campbell that wrestled for me back in the 70s. And he only had 1 year of high school wrestling and he was 30-0. And so, wow, when I got him, he hadn't learned too many bad habits and he was pretty talented. All he did was go on and become a 3-time national finalist, 2-time winner, world champion, went to law school, 10 years later, come back at 38 and 39 and won 2 more world and Olympic medals. But that's how good he is. That's how talented he is. But you don't get them all like that too. But I'll tell you what, a lot of my success has been the people around me. And I already talked to you about that too. But my assistant coaches, Jay Robinson, what did he do? He went to Minnesota and won national titles, probably 3 of them up there. And that's pretty fantastic. And he was my assistant, and I didn't go out and recruit him. He just came from the Olympic Games. And what I lacked, he had. He had these military skills because he was a military guy. But more than that, he was an early morning guy, and he would be in the room just from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock every morning, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock every morning, and teaching technically skills. He went to Oklahoma State, wrestled there under a tremendous coach named Myron Roderick, who was a tactical and technical coach. I'm more of a tough coach. I'm more like beat him up and, that type of stuff. But as I became, and got around people, and I was around Jay about the last 2 years of my wrestling, and he was from a different school. He liked me because I was kind of a tough guy, and I liked him because he was more of a technical guy. And even though he was Greco, we trained quite a bit. But then he came to Iowa, and he was doing a lot of the stuff in the room with the kids, in the morning, in the sessions and that type of stuff. So you compliment people with what. So you got to look at what you're good at as a coach or an athlete, and you got to kind of be around other people that else is needed. I mean, you could be all the talent in the world, but if you can't hold up in a match, you're not gonna win as much, because you got to go the whole time. And it's important for you to realize what you need to go to that next level.
Absolutely. And one of the things real interesting about Iowa, the guys that you coach, they went on to become coaches, many of them, and become some of the greatest coaches in the country. What do you think it is with what you did and their experience at Iowa that enabled them not only to be great wrestlers, but then to go on to become great coaches?
I think the passion of loving the sport and being a 24-hour type of thinking, even when you take time off, you're still planning and still working. And I think that work ethic is something that people, but it's also a sport that it just doesn't happen. And that's why I'm talking about the passion. You got to have the love of it. You got to have the love of it, because it's kind of a different type of sport. It's a tough loss, it's a tough loss in a tough match. And I always say, the toughest matches are the ones you want to win, the toughest matches. And you want to be ready to go every match too, because you could get beat by some guy that not in your category, catch you in one move or something. And that's happened. It happened to me even before. So it's some of these things that I say that one of my quotes is like, wrestling's not for everybody, but it should be, because it's going to teach you beyond wrestling. It's going to teach you life skills. And that's what I like about the sport. And that's why I'm still at it. I'm still at it because I'm still learning life from wrestling.
Absolutely. Just so many great lessons for everyone. So many great things that we could learn, that not only, we always say the whole goal is to use wrestling as a vehicle to build virtue and to build better people. Wrestlers should be the best students. I probably got this from you, Coach. That wrestlers should be the best students, the best workers, the best husbands or wives, the best fathers or mothers, and just the best citizens.
Well, the more you're better at, the better you're going to be in everything you do. And especially if you hone in on something, a father, a parent, a husband, a wrestling coach. So, if you're going out doing anything, if you're better and if you can be good at it, it's going to help reflect on everything you do. Every time you're not good at something, you get used to not being not good at something. And that's not good.
Right. And that virtue is magnanimity, which is striving for excellence in all things. We know that's a Gable principle. That's a biblical principle, a timeless principle, that you don't let a day go by without improving yourself in some way, whether it be your sport, your marriage, your studies, your finances, ideally all of them, like you just said right there.
Yeah, the thing they don't understand, though, when you say that, because you do have something usually that you're really wanting to excel at, like the gold medal. And so you do have to spend majority of your time on that, but you're going to get a lot of help from a lot of people when you're doing good in all these other areas. And the support that you get because of that is going to be just fantastic. And it doesn't have to be with even people that actually living. It could be with people that have already passed on. Your motivation, it comes from so many different places. But when you get help, that is valuable. You think that I could have won 15 national titles or 21 Big Ten titles in a row without my kids and my family behind me. If they didn't care about it, they loved it. And they're probably mad at me because I'm not still coaching. But they wanted me around, and they understand that I was a fanatic and that I'd probably gonna kill myself, just because I'm gonna wear myself out. So they understood it as well. But they're still in it. I mean, it's 20 some years later, 24 or 5 years later, and they still follow it. They love it. Of course, a lot of my grandkids are competing and whatever they're competing in, they're following too, but they love wrestling. They love it. They love it. They won't ever lose it.
Absolutely. And that's why we're all here, because we love the sport of wrestling. We want to grow the sport of wrestling, and we want to support everyone involved in this community. So thank you very much, Coach, for everything. We really appreciate it.
The people that are listening to this, I just want you to know you need to do extra right now for this sport, because the last couple years, even though you probably haven't missed a beat, there are a lot of kids that have missed the beat of our sport because of the last 2 years. And I'm sure that there's a lot of leaders in this country that wouldn't care that if they miss a beat for about wrestling. But I care. You care. And the United States cares. The world cares, because we're all over the world. And we just have to be more tuned in to taking our sport to another level. And you're a part of that. And I'm talking about you right now. And then when I'm talking about you, you're talking about all the 400 or 500 to 600 people that's on this thing. They always say, what can I do to make it? People always say, what can I do to make a difference? Oh my God, you can do 100 things. Just use your imagination a little bit. Don't sit back and say, tell me what to do. You know what to do. And so tune into it and do it. We need help.
That's it. Don't just get a little more involved, get a lot more involved. So thank you very much, Coach. I really appreciate it. Oh, the great Joe Gable, the CEO of Tektronix and Milwaukee Tools, he asked for your autograph right before this. He said he's a big fan. He's the guy you want as a donor for Iowa. So if you could get that, if we get that over to him, that'd be a great thing.
Hey, I'll be on a plane right now bringing it over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Coach. And we want everyone to donate to Beat the Streets and support all the coaches, all the programs, all the books that are put out. Like we said, donate to Beat the Streets. Make sure you make it happen. Keep getting better. Keep working hard. We got the great Dr. Michael Yessis coming up next. He wrote The Secrets of Soviet Sports Training. He translated all the Soviet sports journals from 1964 to 1995. So talk about all that great information, the science and training smarter. That's going to be coming up at 1 o'clock. We'll take a little break now, but thank you again, Coach Gable.
Hey, when you just fired me up, because on my wall is Beat the Russian sign. And you know what? I learned from them. I learned that I had to get better technically. I had to get better tactically. They didn't like my attitude because I was more of a goer. And that's why they respected me. But when I picked up on their skills and what they were good at, it made me more unbeatable to them, because you got to beat them in certain ways. And so you might as well join them as being good, but but keep your keep your attitude. That's going to make the difference in winning and losing. So that's kind of where I'll end up with that.
Thank you very much. The great Coach Dan Gable, working hard and working smart. Thank you for all you do for wrestling, Coach. It's been an honor.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Yep.